There's something wrong with my little brother. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear it's true. He wasn't always like this. He used to be a normal, happy 5-year-old. He loved cartoons, his toy trucks, and he used to laugh all the time. But now he doesn't laugh. He doesn't even speak. And I know deep down that the thing living in my house isn't him anymore. It all started 2 weeks ago. My parents had gone out of town for the weekend, leaving me in charge of watching Danny. I'm 16, so it wasn't a big deal. I'd watched him plenty of times before. Besides, I liked the quiet. My parents tend to hover, and I enjoyed having the house to myself, even if it meant keeping an eye on my annoying little brother. Friday night was uneventful. We ate pizza, watched some movies, and I put Danny to bed around 8:30, just like always. He didn't complain, didn't beg to stay up late, just went to bed without a word. Looking back, maybe that's when it started. Danny wasn't usually that easy to deal with. I stayed up late playing video games, then fell asleep on the couch, exhausted. It must have been around 2 a.m. when I woke up to a strange sound. It was faint, almost like whispering, coming from upstairs. At first, I thought it was the TV, but it was off. My heart started pounding as I realized it was coming from Danny's room. I tiptoed up the stairs, the whispering growing louder with every step. It wasn't just one voice, it was several, overlapping and speaking too fast to understand. When I reached Danny's door, I froze. The whispering stopped. The room was silent, the air heavy and still. I slowly opened the door and peeked inside. Danny was sitting up in bed, his back to me, staring at the wall. I called his name softly, but he didn't respond. He just sat there, motionless. My skin prickled with unease. "Danny?" I whispered, stepping into the room. He turned to face me, his eyes wide and unblinking. His face was pale, almost as if he hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. But it wasn't his expression that terrified me, it was his eyes. They were too dark, like the light wasn't reflecting off them anymore, as if they were pools of blackness, staring straight through me. "Danny, are you okay?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. He just stared at me for a moment, then slowly turned back to the wall, lying down as if nothing had happened. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my heart racing, before I backed out of the room and shut the door. The next morning, I convinced myself it had just been a nightmare. I didn't mention it to Danny or my parents when they called to check in. But something had changed. Danny barely spoke the entire day. He didn't want to play, didn't want to watch his favorite shows. He just sat in the corner of the living room, staring at the wall. That night, it happened again. I woke up around the same time, the whispering echoing through the house. But this time, it wasn't coming from Danny's room. It was coming from the hallway, just outside my door. My throat went dry, and every instinct screamed at me to stay in bed, to not open that door. But I couldn't help myself. I got up, opened the door just a crack, and peeked into the hallway. Danny was there, standing in the dark, his back to me. He was muttering something under his breath, words I couldn't understand. His hands hung limply at his sides, his head slightly tilted as he whispered to someone. But there was no one else there. My blood ran cold. "Danny?" I croaked, my voice barely audible. He stopped whispering. Slowly, he turned to face me. His eyes were still that same inky black, devoid of life, and his mouth curled into a small, unnatural smile. It didn't look like Danny anymore. "He's coming," Danny whispered, his voice not his own. "He's almost here." I slammed the door shut, heart pounding in my chest. I didn't sleep that night, too terrified to close my eyes. I stayed awake, listening to the faint whispers outside my door, wondering who he was and what was happening to my brother. The next morning, things got worse. Danny refused to eat, refused to leave his room. He just sat in his bed, staring at the wall, whispering to himself. My parents were due back that night, and I was counting the hours until they got home, praying they'd know what to do. But by the time they returned, Danny wasn't in his room. He wasn't anywhere in the house. We searched for hours, tearing through every room, calling his name. The police came, but no one could find him. It was like he had just disappeared. But I knew better. That night, after the police left and my parents finally fell asleep from exhaustion, I heard it again, the whispering. It was coming from the backyard. I grabbed a flashlight and, against every ounce of fear in my body, went outside. The air was cold, the kind of biting chill that doesn't belong in the middle of summer. The whispers grew louder as I approached the edge of the yard, near the old oak tree that stood just beyond the fence. And then I saw him. Danny was standing under the tree, his back to me, just like before. He was whispering, his voice low and guttural. But there was someone else with him now, a tall figure, cloaked in shadows, standing just behind him. The figure's face was obscured, but its presence was overwhelming, a towering darkness that radiated malice. My heart stopped. I called out to Danny, my voice breaking, but he didn't turn. The figure behind him slowly raised a hand, long and thin, pointing directly at me. That's when Danny's whispering stopped. The air went silent, and Danny's head twisted around to look at me. His body didn't move, just his head, turning all the way, eyes black and empty. "He's here," Danny whispered, his mouth curling into that same terrible smile. The figure behind him took a step forward, and I ran. I didn't look back, I didn't stop until I was back inside, slamming the door behind me. My parents woke up to my screaming, but they didn't believe me. They never did. Danny's still missing. The police say they have no leads, no trace of him anywhere. But I know the truth. He's still out there, under that tree, waiting with him. And every night, I hear the whispering, growing louder, closer. Something's coming for me next.